incredibly long. Cool, thank you very much, appreciate it. And back. At some point, I need a new roll of tape. I'm getting down, headed for a long time.
This is the last word.
It's like,
Yeah.
You go to the door that's right past, or second door past the glass door, that is the restroom.
yeah.
Hey, Reed. Oh. Court. So I got two to pick up now. Yeah. Thank you. I'll get it. All right, appreciate it. All right, man. All right, bye.
I mentioned something.
Hello. I think we're still waiting for the state rep to be here.
You're not supposed to sit in front row.
I have no idea.
Just wondered why nobody did. She went to a softball tournament.
Yep, yeah, I tried using the new one, I didn't like it. Therefore,
It is a different muscle memory, like
Yeah.
the front,
yep,
yeah, that, cause at first I kept doing this and
Yep.
nothing there,
yeah,
the legs.
those feet, those freaking feet, I had two of them pop off on me.
Yeah,
I lost one,
Yeah,
but one of them I
Almost
happened,
lost.
it happened to pop off on my car, so I didn't notice it, and somebody said, hey, I found this. I looked at mine like, oh,
yeah, they do come out really easily.
yeah, I don't like that too much.
Yeah.
It's heavier than this.
Well, yeah, that one,
Is that the, that's, I mean, this is the, it's a light, that's heavier.
yeah, yeah.
That one's heavier, so I was like, nah, I tried it, I tried for about a week or whatever, and I was like, nah, I'm going back to
Yeah.
this. I just like, I don't like a spreader too, and I know you can pop that off, whatever, but
Yeah.
I like having the spreader on there, so, no.
Have this thing flip over.
The tripod did?
Yeah, camera.
Oh.
Down south,
Yeah.
goes down. Yeah. It was windy. So I did have this, I had a spread, you know,
Yeah.
as far as the spread goes,
Sure.
I mean, I guess I could spread it farther if I wanted to, because you got the extension.
Yeah.
But,
Big top on her here. She was a bit.
You know, my mom, just bring her back to.
onto the asphalt. We got real lucky because it didn't do
The last time I
Yeah.
met
And
her,
it still
she had knee
work,
surgery.
yeah.
They
They
brought her home.
read at it, got some spare parts.
And I bring her back to the house and Tom's like, no. She was like, thinking of being right back home. Be here. She's like, it's not.
So what time was just the wind, or was it?
Don't make
Yeah, the leg thing,
likes her.
and it was
She's a
in
little more
front, like
energy.
balance,
So even when
probably
she
spread.
is like
Yeah.
I mean,
playful,
then it was windy, but it wasn't like
14 pounds of it
Yeah.
versus, you know, like
That's
this
what
is 70-pound
I
dog.
know it's a little top heavy.
Yeah, but these
Yeah.
things too, this thing makes me mad too, cause I go to like stretch it out or whatever, and like, and I'm like trying to twist this thing and like the lock and it's kind of annoying too, like the. Cause, yeah, like I said, I told him, I was like, I tried.
Yeah.
But no, I'll stick with this.
Now you probably got more farms because everybody went to the.
Right, right.
Yeah, now there's those bushings or whatever they.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Why do you keep going?
I mean, they took off the, cause this, remember, this had a bigger head on, a heavier head. Oh, no, it's the same, it's the one that everybody has, so it's like, that's, yeah, it's much lighter, yeah, it's so much lighter now.
Sniff each other.
Sniff each other,
Lighter,
say
like,
hi.
so lighter than that whole
My girl
setup.
follow them
Yeah.
on the fence line
So,
and then
not like
this
terribly, not like, oh my gosh, but it is lighter.
Yeah.
is all day. The dogs to marry them is good job. Those dogs are cool. So what's happening here? They bark at her, they see her, especially the ones next door. How are you guys? Oh, your dog, woof woof, bark at her and she's.
She's cute. It smells like her as well. Like, have fun this summer.
On a vacation days.
Oh my god, I'm sick, you know, to say it as well.
You do that spring break or?
No, end of September. It's gonna be awesome. I'm excited, but not. This is there you go.
Right, it's just outrageous. Talking with Rachel and I were walking this weekend. I shouldn't complain. I'm noticing with what I looked over at the end of the month is gone from this to this.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm not buying stuff for myself. I'm not going places we don't eat out hardly. Yeah, so
Bigger down the they would want it's like
I don't even wanna know how many phases she just, every time we go and check in, she's like every 6 months basically. And she's like, this summer, I wanna catch them before they hit that, about the time they hit that close. For boys, it's about this, I'm like, okay. She Starting January 1st, you know, I've been working speech therapy because I have to private pay. And this comes with like she charged me $125. Like to the rate. Well, they did that, they just kind of 1% of that. So we were paying like 60 something dollars. I think they paid 68. Right, so we got like, I'm saving to get bills paid. We're supposed to last month. Like, I didn't get a payment. I didn't even check back to November. Because I'd submit them. I was like, couldn't even tell me what was wrong with what I was doing. I saved her. And call her. Answer her directly. And they probably hated it. But they have to actually talk to somebody. But she was helpful enough. She goes, well, just write me a letter. She's like, send it to me. So the last two times I submitted, please, like, can you point me to somebody? I can talk to her about this, my appeal. I did it again about 2 weeks ago. I'm talking about yesterday. Checks all back to January, so they filled in the difference. And then the last three that I submitted, they 80% of the gross amount. But they're discounting. So I guess it's not a network. This was like $125 starting beginning last year. I didn't know it was gonna be. You couldn't tell me. I was so frustrated.
Sorry, we're running a little late. Everybody gets a donut.
It's my fault, sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
My kids.
It's health food, it's police bait.
Well, there you go.
No, thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
No? Nobody? Wow.
I'll try to be good, I guess.
Maybe
So
later.
tempting.
Afterwards, we'll grab one.
I will take one.
Good.
Share, I mean, it's.
Oh, thanks.
Good, thank you.
You like one?
Perhaps get
Alrighty.
Alright.
We're good.
You good? Okay, thank you for coming. Apologize for the scheduling mix-up, where we talked about it happening on Wednesday, but a variety of things happened, and thankfully you're here and we're here. We wanted to bring to your attention a major health crisis that is developing across the country. Xylazine is an animal tranquilizer. Street nickname is typically Trank, and it's increasingly found in deaths and in controlled substances that are seized, in our cases, in the county and across the country. It is not approved for human use. It's used by veterinarians to tranquilize animals, typically large animals. And what we're seeing is it being used as a cutting agent and mixed with fentanyl. And the problem with that is, first, it's a terrible drug on the human physiological makeup. It begins to basically degrade and disintegrate your skin over time. We'll show you some information on that. And number two, it makes the saving efforts that we often come across less and less effective because there's no impact on Narcan on this particular drug. So it may take multiple doses of Narcan to save someone that has overdosed on fentanyl laced with tranq. Currently, it's not a controlled substance on the federal level. This came to my attention as head of government affairs for Major County Sheriffs of America. We've been working for a couple months in Washington to figure out a way to change that, and hopefully Congress will address that, because we're seeing it shipped in legally, believe it or not, from China in packages and in the mail and other kinds of things, and drug dealers are buying it direct from China, and it's being smuggled in, even though it's not illegal, but it's usually being smuggled in across the Mexican border because it's coming with other drugs that are being manufactured in Mexico as well. So our two principal sources tend to be Mexico and China, and it's a terrible, terrible drug as it relates to human physiology, and as I said, in terms of our ability to save someone that's in the midst of the throes of an overdose. Its basic symptoms, if you will, it has the sedation effect on a human. It lowers their breathing, their blood pressure, slows their heart rate. There's very severe withdrawal symptoms and ultimately death. As I said, Narcan does not have an impact on it. It doesn't reverse its effect. It can be seen in a variety of forms. Legally and traditionally in veterinarians, they use it as an injectable. But most of the time when you're seeing it in the illegal space, it's as a powder or in a solid form. And it can be swallowed, inhaled, smoked, snorted, or injected into muscles or veins. Effects can last 8 hours or longer. And it's hard to determine, again, what they've taken because we're seeing so many things being mixed in on the street level. And what we're seeing, I appropriated is the best term, from Philadelphia, some of this slide presentation you're going to see. So that gives you some of the basic looks of it. It started to move up the East Coast in a much faster fashion. They got overwhelmed with it in the Philadelphia area and in part of the East Coast a lot faster. And its migration has now very much complete and is in our area as well. As I said, it's a veterinary sedative, muscle relaxant, talks about the legitimate uses, large animals, and again, it's not a controlled substance and it's not for human consumption whatsoever. What we're seeing for illicit, illegal uses is that, they're using it as a cutting agent so they can reduce the amount of fentanyl that's in a particular packet or dose. Primarily, we're seeing it, again, shipped in or smuggled in, but they're also stealing from some veterinary clinics, and they can powderize it and mix it in with drugs. Ultimately, as I said, we see it typically in the illegal space in a white to off-white powder form and can be utilized in the variety of methods that I explained. This is a little more graphic. It shows you what happens to the skin over time. It begins to completely degrade, chronic wounds, infections, lesions, and organ damage, and then obviously it also affects mental health. And so it's a huge, huge threat to health and a big problem. And as I also said and circled it on this slide, it is not affected by Narcan or naloxone, and repeated doses are necessary. So it's a big, big problem. So with that, we pivoted, and I immediately thought, well, if the feds aren't going to act quickly, I know someone that does act quickly. Representative Breen from Oakland County is a person that's chair of the judiciary, which this kind of legislation would go through, and I contacted her and said, we need to do something about it in Michigan if the federal government's not gonna act quick enough. There's a couple states, a very small number, that have done things in their state. We ought to be a leader on this as well, and she immediately jumped on board. So we appreciate her involvement and leadership on that, and with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Breen.
Thank you, Sheriff Bouchard. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I apologize for the delay. Kids' last day of school, bus was a little bit behind. There's some construction. We're fixing, I think, all the roads at once. So Sheriff Bouchard kindly has helped me out many times with a lot of the issues that have been before the state legislature. As he mentioned, I do chair the Judiciary Committee. We also have another committee, Criminal Justice, that is chaired by my colleague, Kara Hope. We work together as much as we can on a lot of issues. This is something, though, that we need to take immediate action. I'm sorry to say that my family lost a very dear friend to a fentanyl overdose, and this is worse. What we are seeing here with Trank is taking our worst opioid epidemic ever and compounding it. As you can see from some of those very graphic pictures, it's horrific. And due to this dramatic uptick in opioid deaths, the use of Narcan has increased. However, as the sheriff mentioned, it has been ineffective with a single dose. I have some draft legislation to make Xylazine a Scheduled II narcotic. I look very much forward to working with the sheriff as well as Prosecutor McDonald, Michigan State Police, and any and all law enforcement officers, organizations across the state to combat this epidemic. This is going to take a multifaceted approach. Not only do we need to make sure that this becomes a scheduled drug so we can try to stop it at the border, but we also need to make sure that there is education on how widespread it is and what first responders can do if they come across somebody who is overdosing or on this particular drug. So there is nothing more important to me than the safety of the community that I represent, and so I want to be able to drop this legislation quickly. I do have a draft bill. I expect that I will be dropping it within the next week or so, if not next week. This is simply to make it a Schedule II. There's still a lot more that needs to be done, and I will be looking to the people who are most well-educated in this topic to include Sheriff Bouchard, Prosecutor McDonald, and the Michigan State Police, because we will need to increase efforts with testing, and I'm sure the outreach and education component will be vast. So that's really all that I have for you. And Sheriff Bouchard, anything else?
So, and the final explanation point, if you will, on this is our lab, which we have in-house. We have a full-service crime lab, and our experts are on top of this and many other challenges. They have told me that they're seeing in about 80%, 85% of what we're testing with fentanyl, testing it for fentanyl seized items have Trank in it. So it's already present in 80 to 85% of what we're testing. That's a stunning change, obviously, in a very short period of time. Very, very dangerous. So as the representative said, big component is education. A lot of people are affected and grabbed by the terrible tragedy of addiction. We need to them be aware of, the potential dangers that are increasing constantly in the addictive process of what they're taking, and know that there's help available, and then on the other end, to punish the people that are profiting off of their death and misery. A lot of people do this and make a lot of money, and that's the point of using it as a cutting agent. And there's a very clear shift in cartel methodology. They don't care about killing people because they'll know they've got another list after that. And with 100,000 people dying in the last 2 years in America each year from overdose, that I think has to be declared clearly a public health emergency. So, questions? Yes.
How many deaths have there been in Oakland County?
Well, there's not specific information to deaths that's related to Trank. When I communicated with our lab and they stay on top of national trends and asked for us to begin tracking it. This is what we came up with. It's just coming on the radar of a lot of agencies and labs. So we can't give you a hard number on attributable deaths here in Oakland County to tranq or with the component of tranq. But that's something I think that, of course, you all sharing the message is gonna help.
There is some information on a national basis. The DEA put out a report in October of '22. Overdose deaths involving xylazine have increased by over 1,000% in the South, 750% in the West, and 516% in the Midwest.
And that's where they're testing for it. That's what I'm saying, education, because a lot of, they don't really look for it until they do, right?
Meaning you could be having deaths already, we just don't know if that was in the mixture that caused the death.
Correct.
Yeah, potentially.
Correct. Yes.
I know you had mentioned, did somebody else have a question? I'm sorry. I know you had mentioned that you were taking action here in the state because you were waiting for quicker federal response, and I know the DEA has a task force here in this area that is trying to monitor what sort of fentanyl is in the area, how it's coming, where it's going. And so to that end, I know you are drafting legislation to get this on the books to make sure that doesn't become a bigger issue. But can you guys speak to some of the coordinated efforts that you may have currently with the DEA task force here or any federal agencies?
Yeah, of course. So we're embedded with the DEA and they're embedded with us. So we partner on a daily basis. And we partner on a national level. So all of the agencies on the federal level, including, as I said, I'm representing Major County Sheriffs of America, are pushing and encouraging Washington to do something. The DEA cannot, issue an order to change that. It has to come through either the legislative or the administrative issuance process, which they don't control. And so that really has to be primarily Congress to deal with that on a national basis. And I find myself frustrated, honestly, a lot these days because there's so many things that we need help with, and it seems like we just don't get it. They focus on a lot of things, but the stuff we need. Yes?
The 80 to 85% statistic, what time period was that over?
When did we start testing that?
I'd say probably February, March, is when we started looking for it
Yeah.
specifically.
So I was at a Washington meeting in January, and then was involved in some other things, and then I asked our lab to start looking for it. So that's when, February, March. Yes.
The DEA had a press conference a couple months ago, and I think they said that they were finding xylazine in, I think, like 27% of the fentanyl that they were testing. 85% is a lot more. So are you guys just testing more, or is Oakland County like doing a spot for it?
It's hard to say, again, until we get kind of a better picture with more and more labs testing and more agencies kind of situationally aware of it. As I said, it's capable to be looked for, but you don't really look for things that you don't know because they constantly change. They're making synthetics, they're constantly doing different kinds of things that they're using as cutting agents, and so it constantly evolves. But I'm super proud of our lab and our team that stays on top of these things and tracks it for us.
One of the things, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, but
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, well, thanks. I have a question about Narcan. Did you say it doesn't work at all if there's tranq in the substance, or that it just requires repeated doses?
It doesn't work specifically on tranq, and the combination of fentanyl and tranq has a magnifying effect, if you will, on the physiology. So they have to use more Narcan to revive, to get those receptors firing again.
So even if you gave 3 or 4 doses, it still might not work if there's tranq
Correct.
in there.
It depends on the amount of tranq in the dose and the physiological effect of those different components that are in their body. Because Narcan, as I understand it, doesn't have any effect on tranq alone. I don't know if we have a doctor in the house, but that's my understanding, that it magnifies the effect on the body from the other things, and we can affect the opioids with the Narcan. Yes.
My understanding is that Narcan doesn't work on xylazine because xylazine isn't an opioid. So
Correct.
like could you be overdosing on fentanyl and xylazine and the Narcan work on like the fentanyl overdose, but you still die because it doesn't do anything for xylazine?
Yeah, it doesn't do anything for the xylazine, so it takes more dosage because the magnification of that symmetry, if you will, of those two drugs has an impact on the body. And so that's why it takes more doses, and we may not have enough dose or we may not get there in time because it's been overwhelmed already.
How specifically will the legislation help? I mean, obviously, it makes sense you wanna make it illegal, but like, what will that help you do, and
Yeah.
what specifically else are you gonna try to add to give them more tools?
Yeah, so for us, it gives us the ability to, stop packages that are coming from China, to have another charge against the dealers of this death, and has the opportunity for us, to make an impact on that front, on the enforcement level. The education level, you're a huge help. It's just, kind of a 1-2 punch. Right now, we don't have any tools. They can be shipping UPS to your house, and that's not a good thing.
So the legislation I have is, again, it's very simple, fix to add it to the schedule. But I do look forward to working with whoever we can get involved to make it more of a policy component. And it might not even necessarily take additional actual legislation, but more of like a coordinated effort through the governor, through the attorney general, through MSP, through the sheriffs, through all of our local police departments, and in the schools even too. So the education component is huge. That doesn't take legislation. But depending on how conversations move forward, as we learn more about the prevalence of the drug and how it works, we may need additional legislation to help push things through. But right now, the most important thing is to make sure that we can stop it in its tracks.
And to be clear, the representative and I agree 100% that, we don't want to impact legitimate use with veterinarians.
That's true.
The point of this is to target the illicit use and what's causing probably a magnified intensity of death in our communities.
Because we were moving swiftly on this, the legislation in and of itself doesn't exclude veterinary use, but that's not how it works even with other scheduled drugs. So we do want to make sure that it is available as needed for veterinary use, which as far as I know, the only legitimate use. Like ketamine, a horse tranquilizer, as we saw, has been horrific and devastating. We might follow that same footpath in order to combat that, but I'm going to rely on the people who are really in that zone, such as Sheriff Bouchard and the prosecutors, to make sure that we can combat this as effectively as possible.
Yes.
Has the legislation been introduced or will it be?
It has not been introduced yet. I have the draft. I expect I'll be dropping it, I hope, next week. And then as far as a hearing path, it depends on, well, several things. If at all possible, we can get it done before we go into our in-district work period. I'm gonna try to make that happen. It could go through my committee, it could go through the Criminal Justice Committee, but given the urgency of the situation, I wouldn't be surprised if we're able to get something through before the end of the month. I'm optimistic.
Is there a target market per se for where these drug dealers are trying to push the drug to here in the streets? Are you seeing anything? I know you guys have a pretty expansive cyber crimes unit, and one of the things the DEA had showed us was that they were marketing a lot of the fentanyl to younger kids through way of texting, social media, different things of that nature. Is there a target market, or are you seeing it?
Well, obviously from our testing, we're seeing it, in huge numbers across the board. But we have the blessing of having one of the largest narcotics enforcement consortium teams in the state. So this is very much on their radar. And obviously with our in-house computer crimes unit, all of those work in this same building, so they communicate and work, those kinds of problems together. Yes.
You said your lab is testing for trank Do you know if the medical examiner's office does, or if any medical examiner?
You know, I can't speak what they're doing with their samples.
Obviously, people who died of an overdose, they don't test them.
Yeah, no, and that's part, again, the education process for police practitioners, for police crime labs, for MEs, and it depends, varies by state. Like in the state of California, a lot of sheriffs are the ME too. So a lot of my colleagues on Major County Sheriffs of America are also the medical examiner. So they have it all tested under one lab, so it kind of varies state to state, the setup. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your swifty action, not Taylor Swift, but
Well,
That's me, I'm sorry, I was recorded there. Good lie. Old AOL.
That dated me too.